Hey everybody, and welcome to our session on maximizing memory. My name is Paul Nowak. I'm the founder and CEO here at Iris Reading. Thanks for joining us today. And today we're going to cover memorization techniques. And these are strategies you can use to memorize information. And it's not something people are generally taught. I mean, some people are, but some people are taught mnemonic devices. That's not what we're going to cover today. Mnemonic devices are great when someone can create them for you, but that's not a system. A system is something I got to memorize something on the fly, and I have a system for doing that. And there are various systems, or you could think of them as methods or strategies. But mnemonics are basically quick little tricks to recall information you already know. And it's great when somebody creates a mnemonic for you, but it's a lot harder to create a mnemonic just on the fly. So we're not going to be covering mnemonic devices, but techniques for memorizing information. Now, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel right below the video. That will give you updates every time we add more content, which is going to be on a weekly basis. And you can find that by just subscribing to the channel. And our focus as an organization, when we're doing these kinds of workshops, and we do them for students at universities and high schools, but half of what we do is corporate training. So if you're interested, you could always invite us. My email, by the way, is just paul@irisreading.com if you want to invite us to work with your students or professionals. But what we do is focus on three key areas: speed, want to read faster, and maybe you've attended one of our speed reading workshops. If not, you can go to our website, irisreading.com, and find them there. So we train people to read faster. Also, comprehension is, of course, equally important, actually even more important than speed, because if you're not understanding something, then who cares what your speed was? The whole point of reading is comprehension. And then there's a third area, which is retention. What are you going to remember from what you've just read? Or maybe you have to memorize things for a presentation. I'm no longer in school. So for me, when I'm trying to remember things, typically it's when I'm doing like a new presentation that I've never given before. So that's where memorization might come in handy. And maybe not memorizing every single word. I'm not an actor where I need to remember my words word by word. But if I need to remember a presentation, I need to hit the big points and the details. But when it comes to reading, we want all three of these areas. And I'm bringing up a distinction between comprehension and retention because there's just a subtle difference. Comprehension is what are you understanding the moment you're reading it in real time. Retention is what do you remember later on. Could be an hour later, a day later, a year later. And sometimes you have good comprehension, but then you forget everything later on. So we're going to work on improving memory. And IRIS, the name of our organization, is a method that we would use for approaching material if you need to read and understand it very well. So it starts with, the letter I stands for inspect. What that means is before you read anything, you should always inspect it first. And that just means get familiar with something. You basically be flipping through your chapter or your journal article or report, whatever it is, and you're looking at headings, subheadings, boldface words. You would read the introduction and conclusion. You're just reading selective parts first, or basically the most important information first. Gives you a sense of the structure or a broad view of what you're getting into. And then after we're done with that, we're going to read the material, assuming we have to read it, right? Sometimes you inspect and you might be like, I got the gist of it, that's all I want. If that's your purpose, then that's fine. But if you're in school and you're studying and you want to know your information really well, you have to read the material. There's no shortcuts here. But if we inspect it first, and now we know the lay of the land, what's going to happen to my reading speed and my comprehension if I start reading it now? I'll understand it better. I'll read it faster than I otherwise would have. So that's the whole point of inspecting first and then reading later. And then when we're done reading, most people when they're done, they're just like, okay, next chapter, or they're done and they close their book. Something quick you can do, which will enhance and improve your memory of the material, is to inquire about what you just read. When I say inquire, I mean ask questions. Questions could be simple like, what were the biggest takeaways? Or your questions can be more specific, like what do I need to memorize? And that leads us to the final step here. How am I going to store this information? How am I going to retain it? So let's dive into that. First of all, when it comes to memory, we all know repetition helps you remember things. I'll repeat that. Repetition helps you remember things. We all know that that is true. And I've got some musical imagery here on the screen because we all know that with music, well, music is very easy to remember lyrics to songs that you like or that you hear often, right? That's a good example of repetition. When the song was popular, you heard it over and over again. And I mean, years later, like there are songs I could put on right now you have not heard in years, but you know the lyrics to the song, right? That's all about repetition. You heard that song over and over again. Actually, there's songs you don't even like that you have memorized. I mean, there are songs like boy band songs from the 90s that I didn't even like that I have memorized. That's right. I see in the comments, Baby Shark. See, now look what you've done. You've now it's in my head. Thank you, Cynthia, for ruining the rest of my. I'm just kidding. But yes, when my daughter was 3 years old, she's 7 now. She was listening to Baby Shark over and over. It's got billions of views. I mean, there's only so many billion people on the planet, and it has more than the population. That's because kids are listening to it over and over again, and these things get stuck in your head, regardless of whether or not you like the songs. Now, when we're reading, I don't want to read chapter 5, 6, 7, or 10 times. I want to read it once, and I want to be able to retain it. So I need to get my repetitions in different ways. And that's where, when it comes to reading and remembering, this IRIS method helps, because you're getting repetition by exposing yourself to the material multiple times. So we inspect, that's a repetition. You read, that's another repetition. Now you're inquiring, you're asking questions about what you just read, another repetition. And even this, trying to figure out how am I going to store and memorize this, that's another repetition, because you're mentally thinking about the information. By the way, if you want even more repetitions embedded into this process, here's what you do. Take notes. You inspect the material, jot down some notes. You read. While you're reading, you're taking notes. That's another repetition. Just the simple action of writing something down enhances your retention, because it's another repetition or exposure, or another way to remind yourself of what did I just read. By the way, we have a great course on effective note-taking. If you go to the website, irisreading.com, that's where you can find that note-taking course. Anyway, so let's say we get down to it and we've read this material, we got to memorize something. We got to understand how our memory works. And there are certain principles, or you could think of these as like memory influencers, or things that influence your memory. What are they? Not just repetition. There's also something called visualization. Visualization is just your brain's ability to visualize something that isn't really there. It doesn't mean you're crazy if you're like seeing things in your mind. This is basically your ability to visualize something. Like if I asked you to visualize a cup of coffee, now, I have a cup of coffee right over here in a mug, but you might picture a cup of coffee with a Starbucks logo on it, or you could picture a different kind of a mug. Or if I asked you to picture and visualize a family member, it could be your mom, dad, brother, sister, a cousin, or a close friend. You could visualize what they look like without them actually being there. That's what psychologists call your mind's eye. That's why I have this creepy image of a brain with an eyeball on it. So visualization is important. We're going to use this idea when we start memorizing. We're going to do an exercise today where we're going to memorize some information, and we'll leverage this idea of visualization. Now, there's also visualization, or visual information, is easier to remember. That's why you remember someone's face, but you forget their name. Has this ever happened to you? I know it's happened to me. It's happened to everybody, right? Sometimes we instantly forget someone's name. Or actually, this isn't necessarily forgetting or a memory issue. Sometimes somebody tells you their name, and if you weren't paying attention, your brain just never received it. It went over your head. So it's not always a memory issue. Sometimes it's more of an attention issue. So we want to make, if you want to remember names, first and foremost, we got to pay attention. Actually, with memory, that's how it is to begin with. If I'm reading, I need to be paying attention for anything to sink in, right? So attention is important to begin with. Now, your visual recall is much better than your verbal recall. That's why companies will have logos and other visuals attached to their brand. The problem is, I mean, we don't have picture books. We have lots of verbal information that we need to read and digest and understand. So we need a way to convert verbal to visual, or what is abstract verbal information. Abstract information needs to get converted to something visual so we can recall it better. We're going to talk about how to do that. Now, think about how your memory works. We know there's short-term and long-term memory. There's a lot of things that a lot of things that affect these two things, short-term and long-term memory. By the way, I want to bring up, and I am keeping an eye on the chat here, so feel free, everyone, to enter questions in the chat, or if you watch this in the future, comments below, we will get to them. Donald is asking, hey, Paul, is there a correlation of songs and spaced repetition, such as the main chorus that is repeated throughout the song between stanzas? Absolutely. So the reason why music is so memorable, there's a lot of different types of repetition, right? Like we said, obviously a song repeats over and over again, but you know what? The beat and the melody also repeats, or as Donald has mentioned in the chat here, you've got the chorus repeating multiple times, and that's related to spaced repetition. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Donald. You're absolutely right. Spaced repetition is important too. So that's why it's more effective to not just, read and take notes, but review your notes later on, maybe an hour later, a day later. So spacing out the repetitions help. Definitely. So short-term, long-term memory. I want you to think about this question here. How many items does it take before you make a list? You could comment below or in the chat if you're joining us live. How many items before you hit that breaking point of like, you know what, let me get a notepad here and I better write this down, or take the notes in my phone. How many items? Because if you just had to get bread and milk, you don't really make a list, right? If you had to get bread, milk, and tomatoes, I could probably still remember 3 items. How many items before you hit like a limit and you say, you know what, I better write this down or I'm going to forget? What is it, 4, 5, 6, 10? Maybe not 10. For a lot of people, like for me personally, it's like 4 or 5. I see Cynthia says 4 over here. For you, for others, it might be 5, or for some, I've heard people say like 3 and I'm tapped out. Now, whatever it is, there is some research into this question. You ever wonder why phone numbers are 7 digits without the area code? It has to do with what they call Miller's magic number. It's named after this guy, George Miller. He was a cognitive psychologist. I think he was based out of Princeton University, but he was doing some research in the 40s where he noticed in his research that the average person could remember about 7 things short term at the max before their memory starts falling off the cliff. I see Donald mentioned 4 over here. Yeah, for a lot of people, it's like 4 or 5. Now, George Miller, he wrote this paper in 1952 called The Magic Number 7 Plus or Minus 2. Now, that had everything to do with this graph you see on the screen here. See the 7 here? That's where most people's memories fall very sharply when it comes to short-term information. When if you have to remember 1 or 2 things, easy, right? 100%. You got to remember 3 things, pretty easy. Once we get to 4 or 5, isn't that where our confidence starts getting a little shaky? Right? That's where we're like, okay, maybe I should write this down, because that's where we're starting to fall off the cliff. So that's what Miller's magic number is all about. Now, this is important for us to know because we want to expand our memory, right? We want to remember more things, but you can also expand your short-term memory. Let me give you an example. And Miller's magic number is why it's hard to remember just 10 digits all at once. Like if I gave you this number 3, 1, 2, 6, 7, 9, 4, 0, 5, 3. Now, if you could, I just said the numbers out loud. If you could still remember them, I said them out loud and I don't even remember what I just said. I would be very impressed. I know it started with a 3, but here's the thing. What if I gave you this number? That's a little easier, right? Looks like a phone number broken up into parts. Which number is easier, top or bottom? I think all of us would agree the bottom one is easier if you had to memorize it. Now, we don't have to memorize phone numbers, right? We could just store them in our phone. But the idea here that I'm trying to demonstrate is there's a reason why this number on the bottom is easier to process and remember. It's because it looks like a phone number and it's broken up into parts. Oh, and if you haven't already noticed, these are exactly the same 2 numbers. Isn't it weird how like the top number looks hard, the bottom number looks easy? Actually, watch this. I can change these numbers just slightly. What if I give you a third option, which was 3,126,794,053? All 3 of these digits are exactly the same. This one looks very hard. This one also looks kind of hard. But the one on the bottom looks the easiest, yet they're just formatted differently. And this is easier because of chunking. how did we learn to spell the word Wednesday, right? Wednesday. We broke it up into 3 parts. Sometimes we chunk information without even realizing it. But that's not the only thing going on here. We said it looks like a phone number, right? So, I mean, this phone number here, there's association involved with that. One association is that it looks like a phone number. There's actually another association if you are aware of what area code that is. This is a Chicago area code. By the way, don't bother dialing this number. I just totally made it up. Apologies to the person that has this number if you get phone calls. Now, this reminds me of something called the Baker-Baker effect. And it's something really interesting in psychology that has a lot to do with association, this idea of association and how we remember. So here, let me give you a rundown of how this study works. There's a group, they take 2 groups of people, and one group gets introduced to some guy. During the study, they get introduced to Mr. Baker at some point. Now, what they're trying to figure out in the study is how many people are going to remember his name. So they don't tell everybody that's the point of the study, because if they did, that would kind of skew the results, right? Like if somebody said, hey, I'm going to test you on remembering names, you'd be like, okay, let me get my pen and pad. I'm really going to try to remember this person's name. So they don't do that. What they do instead is they tell them the study is about something else. And halfway through, they get introduced to Mr. Baker. They don't know that they're trying to figure out if they could remember the name, but they get brought back later on. Each individual gets brought back and asked, do you remember anything about that person, maybe their name? And almost everyone forgets. It's usually around like 90% or more of the people in the study that will forget his name, Mr. Baker. Now, that is not interesting. You know why? Because people forget names all the time. So if you feel bad about forgetting names, by the way, my name is Paul, in case you forgot. I'm not going to take offense to that because people forget names all the time. What's interesting about this study is group number 2. They're introduced to the same exact guy, but instead they're told that he is a baker. Not Mr. Baker, they're told his occupation. Now he's not dressed like a baker, he's dressed casually like everyone else. And what happens here, it's really interesting because when they bring this group back and they ask them, hey, what do you remember about that person you met in the study? Almost everybody remembers that he was a baker. It's usually the opposite of the first group where it's like 90% that remember he was a baker. And this is what they call the Baker-Baker effect. In one case, hard to remember the name, Mr. Baker. In the other case, oh, a baker, the occupation, that's easy to remember. And it has everything to do with association. When I say, or when you hear the name Baker, Mr. Baker, you might not make any associations. But if you heard that someone is a baker, you already have associations that you've made in your brain with that occupation, right? You might think of a certain look, right? Baker has a certain kind of a top hat, maybe an apron. You might think of cakes, bread, all sorts of things. And that's why it's easier to remember the occupation versus the name. Now, there's one other thing, and this is very important, that influences your memory in a very large way, and that is the fact that you remember things that are weird. Anything that's strange, exaggerated, is more memorable. That's why at some point, McDonald's in its corporate history decided to use a clown to sell cheeseburgers, right? So I see Donald in the chat mentioning cookies and cake. Exactly. There's all sorts of things you could think of when you think of a baker. Same thing if I said construction worker, or if I said lawyer, or if I said doctor, right? We have associations that are already in our brain for those things. Now, when it comes to weird things and memory, don't advertisers know this really well? That they'll create commercials that are over the top, outrageous, weird, funny. It's done on purpose because you're more likely to remember that. When I tell you Geico, what do you think of? I mean, if you're here in the US, I don't know where you're watching this from, but Geico is a ginormous insurance company. And they have these commercials that they run in the US. I don't know if they run them outside the US, but they always have this talking lizard with I forget if it's a British or Australian accent. But think about all that is done on purpose, right? Talking lizard, that doesn't make any sense. That accent to an American audience is different because, the average American walking around the United States in any given city isn't hearing like a British or Australian accent on a daily basis. Again, apologies, I can't remember what kind of accent that is, but there's all sorts of other companies that do this. I went to the movies recently, and there were some commercials with polar bears drinking Coca-Cola. How dare they? Polar bears are going extinct. I mean, maybe that's why they're going extinct. They're drinking too much Coke. But I mean, again, Coca-Cola does this in the movie theater to influence, and they're doing it with popcorn and things like that to influence you to drink Coke. But they're using polar bears, even though it doesn't make sense. Cute, cuddly polar bears. By the way, polar bears are vicious animals, okay? If you saw a polar bear, you'd want to throw a chair at it because it would be approaching you and trying to eat you, okay? They're not as cute and cuddly as you might think. Okay, so Coca-Cola lying to us about bears drinking. Anyway, I'm going to get off this tangent here. The idea here is that you remember weird things, okay? So, and we're going to use this to take advantage of it to help us remember things. Now, when it comes to storing, how are we going to store? Let's say you got to store some information here from this book, Brain Rules. Let's say you read the whole thing cover to cover. It's about 300 pages in length. You see the subtitle here, 12 Principles for Surviving and Thriving at Work, Home, and School. Here are the 12 brain rules. These are the 12 chapters in the book. Exercise, survival, wiring, attention, short-term memory, long-term memory, sleep, stress, sensory integration, vision, music, and exploration. All right. Got it? Now, I'd be surprised if you had all 12 memorized just from that first exposure to the information, but I'm going to show you how you can memorize it using a system, a technique. We're going to learn, and this is such a cool technique, the numeric peg system. I say it's such a cool technique because it's so easy to learn and it's quick to implement. So we're going to implement it right now. You're going to memorize all 12 of these brain rules in order. Okay, just make sure you're paying attention as we explain the system. The reason it's called the numeric peg system is because every number, 1 through 10, is going to get pegged or associated to a visual. So I need you to commit these 10 visuals to memory, okay? And the reality is you could have your own visuals, but for the sake of this exercise, just assume I want you to memorize the visuals that I provide for you. So the number 1, I want you to visualize the number 1 as a pencil, okay? Keep that in mind, 1 is a pencil. You can write it down if you want, you don't have to. It's pretty straightforward, right? The number 1 is a pencil because it has the same shape. The number 2 is a swan. You see the same shape of a swan and a 2? I mean, it's not an exact replica, but it's a visual approximation. So 2 is going to be a swan. Number 3 is going to represent McDonald's. Okay, got to turn your head sideways for this one. So you see the M, the golden arches there, M for McDonald's. Number 4 is going to be a chair. Now it's upside down. You see the number 4 here? The chair. So there's the seat, there's the backrest, and the legs are over here. It's upside down. But when I tell you 4, I need you to think of a chair. Number 5 is going to be a hook. See the curvy part of the 5? There's the curvy part of the hook. The hook is upside down in this case, but if you had to draw the 5, you draw it from the top, going down, and the curvy part. So 5 is a hook. Now, when we're doing this, when we're memorizing anything, it's good to chunk things into parts. So we're trying to memorize 10 visuals. I'm just going to do a quick review for you with little pauses so you can think about it. What are each of the numbers 1 through 5? So think to yourself, what is number 1? Got it, right? Number 1 is obviously a pencil. Number 2, do you remember number 2? Pretty easy, right? The swan. How about number 3? Do you remember 3? Oh yeah, that's McDonald's. And how about number 4? Do you remember the number 4, what it looks like? Oh yeah, the chair. And I'm just pausing briefly here. I know some of you are getting it right away, just so you can think about it. 5, of course, is what? That's the hook. Okay, so we got pencil, swan, McDonald's, chair, and hook. So what do we got to do now? Let's just finish it up, 6 through 10. The cool thing is you only got to remember 10 items for this to work really well. 6 is a cherry. So a cherry, the fruit here, and you see the cherry right there and the little stem coming out? Kind of looks like a 6. We're going to use the cherry to remind us of a 6. Okay. 7 is a lightning bolt. Okay, see the number 7 over here? You see the number 7 over here? There are multiple 7s in a lightning bolt, but when I tell you 7, you need to think of lightning. 8 is going to be a racetrack, even though it'd be kind of weird if they made racetracks with intersections like this. Just go with it. 8's going to be our racetrack. 9 is going to be a balloon. Okay, so imagine here's the balloon right here, and there's a little string coming out, right? Kind of like a balloon. 9 looks like a balloon, generally speaking. 10 is going to be a place setting. When I say place setting, I mean a plate or a bowl, whatever you want, plate or a bowl, and some silverware on the side. It could be a spoon, a fork, chopsticks, whatever you want, but the idea is you have a 1 and a 0 to represent 10. 10 is our place setting. So we'll do a quick little recap and then we'll start memorizing. 6, what is 6? Think about it. Cherry. What about 7? Do you remember that? If you're thinking lightning, very good. How about 8? 8, of course, is the racetrack. How about 9? Good if you're thinking balloon. And number 10, hopefully you can remember 10 is the place setting, right? A plate or a bowl, some silverware on the side. Okay, awesome. And of course, we have the success baby here. Now, let's start memorizing. We got to memorize whatever respective topic is next to its respective images, assuming these images are respectable. I don't know, maybe they aren't. Here are the visuals or the topics we got to remember. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to associate each one of these topics to their associated images and numbers. So for number 1, we have exercise, right? So you see here we have exercise, survival, wiring, attention, short-term memory, long-term memory, sleep, stress, sensory integration, vision, and there's even more. There's actually 12 total. I'll explain how we deal with anything above 10 when we get there. Let's start with exercise. Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to give you the visual that I came up with to remember this, and your goal is to take a moment to visualize in your head what would that look like. That might require you to look up and to the left or right, or to close your eyes and think about it. You don't have to close your eyes. I just want you to actively try to picture what I tell you. So imagine for exercise, the image of a brand new gym opening up in your neighborhood. Okay, there's a brand new gym. You sign up for the gym, you go there, and you notice something weird about this gym. Everybody is working out with pencils. Okay, somebody, doing curls with a pencil, someone on the bench press with a pencil, someone else doing like the shoulder press with a pencil. So imagine this weird gym where everybody is working out with pencils. Maybe you're regretting signing up for this gym now. And of course, we're doing that because we need to associate pencil with exercise. Oh, and the reason for all the exaggeration is we mentioned earlier, you remember things that are weird. So that's why all of these images are going to have some level of exaggeration to them. Let's move on to number 2. 2, remember the image for 2 is a swan. You got to link that or associate it with survival. I want you to imagine a swan struggling for survival in that it is drowning. Imagine a swan in the middle of a lake drowning, like it doesn't know how to swim. Maybe you feel bad for the swan. You jump in to try to save it or help it. Now that doesn't make any sense because swans should have like this default setting of knowing how to swim, but not this one. Just imagine this strange swan that is struggling for survival because for some reason or other, it didn't learn how to swim. Okay, 2's survival. That's how we'll remember that. Number 3, we're going to do it. Well, that's McDonald's, right? The 3 is McDonald's. We got to remember wiring. That is chapter 3 in that book. Wiring. How are we going to do this? Imagine for McDonald's, you go there, you go to McDonald's, you order, a Big Mac, and when you bite into it, there's a piece of barbed wire in your Big Mac. Imagine how angry you would be. Imagine how disgusting that would be. And imagine how painful that would be. Like if you bit into a burger with a piece of barbed wire, that'd be pretty painful. Now I'm asking you to imagine these emotions. How painful would that be? Disgusting, how angry you would be, because your emotions play a part in how you remember things too. Isn't it true that people that go through like traumatic experiences, they remember a lot about those experiences because they're full of emotion? That's the whole nature of a traumatic experience. So what I'm trying to get at here is if you can try to involve your emotions when you're trying to remember things, whether that's negative or positive emotions. In this case, it's kind of negative. It doesn't have to be negative. They can be positive emotions like something really funny, something ridiculous that's silly, something that makes you very happy. All of that can help you remember something. So we're going to just picture a Big Mac with barbed wire in it to remember wiring. Now, number 4 is a chair, right? 4 for chair. You got to remember attention. I want you to imagine a chair that helps you pay attention. You see this chair? You see those hands? Every time you're not paying attention during a webinar, it just kind of nudges you on the shoulder like, hey, pay attention. Okay. This is a very creepy looking chair. I don't know who would buy this, but imagine a chair that helps you pay attention. 5 is a hook. So we got to remember or associate hook with short-term memory. Now, if you look ahead in the table of contents, you'll notice that number 6 on the table of contents is long-term memory. So we just need to distinguish between short and long. And for this one, when I think of hooks, I don't know about you, but it reminds me of pirates. So I'm going to go the pirate route in terms of imagery. And I got to remember short-term memory. So I'm going to picture some very short pirates, like some baby pirates, okay? Or toddler, baby, toddler, whatever, infant pirates. And they're all on a beach. There's like 20 of them. Apparently this one has a peg leg. They're digging for their buried treasure. There's a bunch of them digging. And the reason why they buried their treasure last night, just assume this situation, they buried their treasure last night. Problem is they can't remember where they buried it because they have short-term memory problems, okay? Notice how I'm really, really doubling up on the whole short idea. Short pirates with short-term memory problems. That's because I really want to remember that 5 is short-term memory. Okay, we move on, and if you had to recall, here's the process. You start with number 1, and you're like, okay, 1, what does the image of a 1 look like? Oh yeah, that's easy. That's a pencil. So pencil basically serves as your clue to remember what? What is number 1? That's easy. That's exercise, right? You remember the image of people working out with pencils. That's how you remember exercise. When you get to number 2, you're thinking about a swan, right? So the swan is now like our clue to remember, oh yeah, the swan that was drowning. Number 2 is survival, right? So it's kind of how it's almost like we're leaving breadcrumbs to help us recall the memory. Number 3 is McDonald's. Oh yeah, McDonald's. There was a Big Mac with barbed wire. Chapter 3 is about wiring. Number 4, same thing. 4 is a chair. Oh yeah, that really creepy chair that helps you pay attention. Attention is number 4. And number 5, the hook. Oh yeah, that's pirate related. Really short pirates, short-term memory. So that's how we backtrack. Let's run through the rest of them because now I think you get the idea. 6 is long-term memory. We got to associate with a cherry because 6 is a cherry. Picture a cherry with a really long stem, something like this. Imagine you're at the supermarket, you get a bag of cherries and you notice one of them has like a 3-foot long stem and you're just confused by this. Long-term memory, cherry with a long stem. 7 is sleep. We got to associate that with lightning. So imagine you get a brand new alarm clock, and this one has a special feature. When you hit snooze, you get struck by lightning, or zapped. You survive. It's to provide a disincentive from hitting snooze multiple times a day. So that's related to sleep, snooze, all that. 7 is sleep. Okay. 8 is a racetrack, right? We got to associate that with stress. The chapter is stress. Well, how are we going to do this? I'm going to imagine, remember I said they wouldn't make racetracks with intersections like this? Imagine they did. And every time the race car drivers get close to that intersection, they're of course afraid of maybe crashing. That's very stressful. So imagine this kind of imagery of a racetrack with an actual intersection. I would picture these race car drivers sweating like crazy. They're really stressed out. And that's all because I got to remember stress is number 8. 9. That's a balloon, right? The number 9 is a balloon. We got to remember sensory integration. Okay. This topic might appear initially as somewhat vague, so maybe you might have trouble coming up with an image. But just keep in mind that if you read the book, you would know that this chapter talks about your 5 senses, and your 5 senses all have visuals, right, associated with them, or body parts. Your sense of touch, smell, your ability to see, taste, and hear. I want you to picture all 5 of these body parts inside of a balloon. Okay, it's got to be a very large balloon. a giant balloon. Imagine what that would look like. And don't even picture this cartoony looking image here. Like, what would that actually look like if there was an actual hand in there, a tongue, a nose? The more creepy you make it, the better, okay? Because we're more likely to remember things that are weird. Number 10, that's how we're going to remember sensory integration. The 5 senses all in a balloon, sensory integration. Now this one is vision, right? 10, vision. The number 10 is a place setting, plate or a bowl, your choice. I think you already know where we're going here, right? What are we going to put in the bowl? Of course, we're going to put a bunch of eyeballs because we got to remember vision. Now, again, I would not picture this kind of cartoony imagery. Like if I was thinking about it in my mind, I'd be like, okay, what would a bowl of eyeballs actually look like? I don't have an image for you, but to me, when I'm thinking of it in my mind, I think they would be kind of moist and bloody. I think, the optic nerve would still be attached. Imagine they have eyelids and one of them actually winks at you. Like, how put off would you be by that? Like, again, the creepier, the better. So 10 is vision. Now, if we got to remember, we do the same thing, right? 6, oh yeah, that's my cherry. What's that remind you of? Long-term memory, right? 7, that's my lightning bolt. 7 is lightning. What was going on with that? Oh yeah, I got struck by lightning when I hit the snooze button. That's related to sleep. 7 is sleep. 8, the racetrack. Oh, that's easy, right? That intersection, stress. Number 9, the balloon. Oh yeah, the balloon was filled with body parts representing the 5 senses. That's exactly the reaction I'm looking for, Donald. Thank you for posting that emoji. Number 9, of course, is the balloon filled with eyeballs. And yeah, so that's sensory integration. And the one we just did, 10, the place setting, plate or bowl filled with eyeballs. Oh, easy, vision. Now we still got a few more left. We haven't covered 11 and 12. And to expand or scale the system up, what you got to do is create a rule. You can think of it as a theme that applies to all the numbers 11 through 20. So, by the way, this is better than what some of you might be thinking is, well, 11, why don't we just use 2 pencils? A pencil and associate to the topic. Or for 12, why don't we just use for 12 a pencil and a swan? No, don't do that. Here's why. Let's say you use 12, pencil and a swan. What happens when you get to 21? If you had to remember 21 things? Now we got an issue. Now instead of a pencil and a swan in our image, now we got to use a swan and a pencil. And this is where our memories could end up getting crisscrossed. And that's why a better way to expand or scale the system up, if you had to remember 15 things or 27 things, is you got to create rules. So the rule we're going to use for 11 through 20, all the numbers between 11 through 20, the imagery has to include, this could be any rule you want, but we're going to use snow. It doesn't have to be snow. It could be rain. It doesn't have to be weather related. It could be, I don't know, something related to, books or babies or celebrities or cars, whatever you want. But we're going to use snow for this example. And snow has all sorts of imagery, right? Like a snowflake, a blizzard, a snowman, a snowball fight, we can go on. But the way it works is when you get to 11, we're going to reuse this pencil. Even though I used this image to remember exercise, the difference here is that I'm going to use a pencil, because 11 has a pencil here. I'm going to use a pencil with snow, some sort of snow-like imagery. And there's got to be a third element, pencil, snow, and a visual for my topic. For 12, we do the same thing. Swan, snow, and the topic, whatever that topic might be. What are the topics? We already know. We got music and exploration for 11 and 12. Music, exploration. So what do we do here? 11. Remember, we got to include 3 components: pencil, snow, and music. So the image I want you to imagine, when I think of music, I think of like a composer. Picture a composer with, instead of the baton, the baton that they have, they've got a giant pencil instead, and they're composing music. Maybe it's in blizzard-like conditions outside. Actually, I would imagine a whole orchestra. You don't have to picture this image, but I'm originally from Chicago, and if you've been to Chicago, there's this great park there called Millennium Park, and there's this awesome outdoor music venue that they have where the Chicago Symphony Orchestra sometimes will practice. And you can go out there, have a picnic, and just listen to them play beautiful music. Picture like a composer with a giant pencil, and because it's Chicago, it is snowing like crazy in blizzard-like conditions. That's how we'll remember music. Okay, giant pencil, composer, all that, snow for music. Okay, 12. What is it? Swan, right? Snow again. And the topic is exploration. So the way you do this, if you're doing this on your own, I know I'm giving you the visuals I came up with, but if you're doing it on your own, you basically ask yourself, what's the first thing that pops into mind when I say exploration? And for me, it's space. Exploration reminds me of like space exploration. But you can let me know in the chat or in the comments down below, what do you think of when you think of exploration? Like exploration equals what for you? I mean, I could name you a few things off the top of my head. I'm curious to know what you guys are thinking of. But exploration reminds me of also like exploring the oceans or a mountain or the jungle, or exploration could also just reminds me of travel. Like whenever I travel somewhere new, it's like a form of exploration. I also think of Indiana Jones or Dora the Explorer. There's a lot of images or potential things. Now, for me, the first thing that popped into mind was space. So that's almost always what you should go with first. If that's the first thing that pops into mind, go with it. So I need to include space, snow, and swan. I'm going to picture a giant swan-shaped spaceship. Try saying that 3 times fast. Swan-shaped spaceship. Swan-shaped spaceship. It's very hard. Okay, I need snow. Okay, it doesn't make sense, but it's going to be snowing in space. Here we go. We're not going to make it rain. We're going to make it snow. All right, there we go. It's snowing in outer space. Again, makes no sense, but guess what? Everything we're doing here, it doesn't make sense. Memory researchers have a name for this. They call it elaborative encoding. Okay, so that's an academic term for what we're essentially doing, coming up with weird, ridiculous images. Now, it's not an academic term to call it the principle of ridiculousness, so they have to use academic terms, so they call it elaborative encoding. But that's basically what we're doing when we're thinking of a giant swan-shaped spaceship sailing through outer space in blizzard-like conditions, okay, to remember exploration. Now, I have a feeling if we did a little quiz right now, you might be able to get it. And actually, if you're watching this in the future, and you want to quiz yourself, pause the video and just type in the comments below if you could remember all 12 of the brain rules. I'll wait for you. Actually, no, I won't wait because you're watching this in the future and you could just pause. But you get the idea. You could type out, I'll run you through it right now, and this is a spoiler alert in case you're going to be quizzing yourself. Number one, if you're actually, I could do this out of order, right? Like if you were quizzing yourself, you might want to put on a paper like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I could name any of these numbers and you'll know exactly what it is, hopefully. So if I said number 4, write down number 4 if you can remember it. And 4 should remind you of a chair. And you'd be like, chair. Oh yeah, that creepy chair with the hands. Attention is number 4. What if I told you number 7? Write down number 7, write it down. If you get stuck, you just got to be like, okay, 7 is the lightning bolts. Oh yeah, that is related to getting struck by lightning when I hit snooze. That's all about sleep, right? So 7 is sleep. What if, watch this, we could even go backwards and you'll know what it is. I'm going to tell you the title of the chapter and you're going to know exactly where to put it, hopefully. Where does sensory integration go? You know exactly where it goes. Or maybe not. I mean, it's possible you might forget, but sensory integration, that was all about the 5 senses, right? They were in a balloon. Which number is the balloon? Oh yeah, 9. So that's where you would put number 9, sensory integration. How about where should wiring go? Wiring. You're probably thinking number 3, aren't you? Okay, 3 is wiring. How about number 1? What is number 1? The pencil. Oh yeah, exercise, easy. How about number 5? 5 is the hook. By the way, if you're watching into the future and I'm going too fast, you can just pause, of course. 5 is the hook. That reminds me of pirates. And 5 is, of course, the really short pirates, short-term memory. Number 10. Oh, yeah, that's my place setting. What was going on with the place setting? What was in the bowl or the plate? Oh, yeah, a bunch of eyeballs. Vision is number 10. How about number 2? Do you remember 2? the swan. That reminds you of the swan struggling for survival, right? Survival is number 2. We only got a few more here. Tell me number 11, if you could remember that one. Remember, snow is involved. So that's your clue, snow, and 11 has a pencil in it. So pencil and snow. You may recall the composer with the pencil and outdoors in Chicago with it blizzard-like conditions, snowing, and that's all related to music, right? The orchestra and all that. How about number 6? Number 6. The cherry, right? Oh yeah. And so, I mean, I'm pausing here just to let you think about it, but you get the idea. 6 is cherry. Oh yeah, the cherry with the long stem, long-term memory. How about number 12? 12 has a 2 in it. That's the swan. Snow was the rule. So swan, snow. Oh yeah, the swan-shaped spaceship in outer space exploration. Last one, 8. Number 8. I'm just marking them off as we go. That was the last one. I think a lot of you probably got them all, or maybe you commented below with all the brain rules. And if you got them all, great. And that's because what are we doing here? We're visualizing, we're associating, we're exaggerating. Yeah, there's a little bit of repetition in there too, but when you combine all these things together, you make your memories very sticky. They're going to stick in your brain better than just extreme amounts of repetition. You ever hear of rote memorization? That's when you just do repetition to the extreme. And yeah, it can work, but it takes a long time. It's a very boring way to study. And then even if you remember something through rote memorization, extreme amounts of repetition, you're not going to remember it long term because you're only leveraging one part of how your memory works, repetition. What about visualization, association, exaggeration? All these other things tying in your emotions can help you remember things more effectively. And here's the other cool thing about the system. What if you got to remember more than 20 things or more than 30 things? Guess what? We just make another rule. And then that makes it so much easier to remember things. So here's another approach we can take, by the way. Since we have a little bit more time, I'll jump into it quickly. There is a technique that was used by the ancient Greeks, and it's called the memory palace technique, also known as the method of loci. Loci has to do with location. This is a technique that utilizes locations, like your home, to remember things. Now, the ancient Greek technique, this is a legit technique that was used, a few thousand years ago. And it's a shame that it's not more commonly taught because it's a very effective way to remember things. It's just a different system than the numeric peg system. Numeric peg system that we just learned uses numbers. The memory palace uses location. So here's how it works. You take your home and you got to do a walkthrough of your home. So imagine when you get back from school, what is location number 1 that you encounter? The first location might be your front door. It doesn't have to be your front door. It could be the mailbox. It could be the driveway. It could be the lobby of the building that you live in. But you pick a location 1, and then you pick a location 2, and 3, and 4, and you keep on doing these locations. It's a walkthrough. You never repeat a location. And I have 10 here, but you can have more than 10. What do we do then? Well, and actually, here's another approach before I move on from here. You're going to associate these locations to the things you need to remember. But you don't have to follow this approach, like I said, where it's like, okay, you get back from school or work, what's location 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Another approach would be your morning routine. You wake up, where are you? In your bedroom. What's the next location? Maybe you go to your closet to get your clothes, get ready for school or work, and then maybe you go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, and so on. 4, we're in the hallway on our way to the kitchen to make ourselves breakfast, and now we're in the dining room eating our breakfast. After that, maybe we're out the front door on our way to work or school. So this next location could be like, I don't know, whatever your commute is like. Maybe that's getting in your car, on a bus or train. And then maybe it's the first street you encounter. And then now you're at work or school. And you could continue your so-called memory palace from here. How many locations you use depends entirely on how many things you need to remember. So let me give you an example. Let's say you got to remember something technology related, and let's say the memory palace is your home. Let's say these are your first 5 locations, and there's more, and so on. And let's say you got to remember the top 10 largest tech companies in the US. By the way, this is a made-up list, arbitrarily put here. These are not the top 10. Although I do think Apple is number one if you base it off of market capitalization, but Apple, you got to have visuals associated with Apple and associate Apple to a mailbox. And the same idea holds true here, that you got to make the visuals that you come up with weird or exaggerated. So for Apple, what kind of images can we have for Apple? There's a bunch, right? We could use actual apples or iPhones or laptops, or what I would picture is, when I think of Apple, I think of Steve Jobs, the founder or co-founder of Apple. And you know, he passed away a number of years ago, but I would imagine that when I open my mailbox, the ghost of Steve Jobs flies out of my mailbox. Maybe he grants me 3 wishes. For number 2, if it was Amazon, I'd picture a giant box from Amazon at my front door. Or Amazon also reminds me of the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and maybe I picture Jeff Bezos delivering a box to me from Amazon at my front door. It'd be kind of weird. Number 3, if it's Facebook, maybe I picture you know, the founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. I open my door, I get in my house, and I see on my stairway Mark Zuckerberg is sitting there. He's like, "Oh, hey, Paul." And I'd be like, "Mark Zuckerberg, why have you violated my privacy yet again by breaking into my home?" Anyway, the more you get, if you rile up your anger, that can help too. Twitter reminds me of blue birds. Okay, they're flying around the living room. You get the idea. You need an image and associate it to the location. But here's the cool thing about this technique. It can handle details. The numeric peg system can't really do that. Remember, we had like 1 was a pencil, 2 was a swan, 3 was McDonald's, and so on. For number 6, that was a cherry, and that helped us remember long-term memory. But what if you got to remember 8 things about long-term memory, like an 8-step process related to long-term memory? How do we do that? Well, numeric peg system doesn't really help, but this system would. So what you do when you got to handle details, you got to put those details in 3 areas. If you have 3 details. If it's 3 details about Twitter, okay, we're in the living room, there's a bunch of blue birds flying around the living room, and detail 1, 2, and 3 got to be visualized, and then put in 3 areas of the living room. So that might be, I don't know, the couch, the coffee table, and the TV. Same thing for other areas. You just choose 3 sub-locations and put your details there. If you had 3 details, you might have 5 or 10 details. So you could also use multiple memory palaces. This is the other big benefit of using the memory palace technique. So you could use your office place where you work. You can use your school. You can use your friend's place, your grandma's place, your aunt's place. All of these locations can be used. And that comes in handy when you got to remember a lot of different things and you don't want to keep reusing the same memory palace. So when finals week comes around, you can use your house for your history class. You could use your buddy's place for, I don't know, your physics class, and so on. So this is all about storing at the end of this process. So if you're interested in more advanced courses, if you go to irisreading.com/courses, that is where you can find all our more comprehensive sessions. They're taught by me. I think you'll find them helpful if you are interested in diving deeper into speed reading, or we have courses that just focus on comprehension strategies and dive deeper into maximizing memory. We also have an effective note-taking course and also a personal productivity course. And by the way, for those of you watching this session here online, if you're interested in signing up for any of them, and these go a lot deeper into all these topics, we set up a code, and that code is just my name, Paul, for an extra 30% off. And if you're interested in really maxing out your reading speed, optimizing your comprehension and your retention of material, I think you'll find all of these helpful. Just remember that code Paul, and you just got to go to irisreading.com/courses. I dropped the link in the chat if you're interested. And also, don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. We're going to be doing sessions weekly, and not just me, we're going to be bringing in some of our other instructors here on the channel. I know one of our instructors, Cynthia, has been active here on the channel. I think you'll find her sessions helpful too. And here's my contact info if you want to keep in touch, or if you want to invite us to your school or your company or organization to do some sessions in person or private webinars for your group, feel free to shoot me an email. It's just paul@irisreading.com. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, just let me know that you attended this session, and I'm happy to connect. Otherwise, I get a lot of people trying to connect with me that are just trying to sell me things, since I'm a business owner. So usually I try to be selective about who I connect with, but I'm happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. If I could introduce you to anybody in my circle, I'd be happy to. And on Instagram, it's just Paul G. Nowak. It's pronounced Novak, like with a V, but that's where you could find me there. I hope you found this session helpful. I want to thank everyone for checking this out live and also in the future, since we'll leave this up online for who knows how long. But thank you so much. I hope you found this helpful. See if you can still remember those brain rules maybe tomorrow or later on today. You'll be surprised at how sticky those memories are when you associate, exaggerate, and visualize the information. So thank you so much for attending. Have a great rest of the day and feel free to keep in touch. Take care.